now. I mean, really, this is a real good showing. So, you guys are awesome. Thanks for coming. And I hope you're going to have fun and you're going to learn some very interesting things. All right. So, lessons from Canine Cognition Labs. How did I come up with this? And thanks for letting me do this, by the way, because it's kind of a strange topic in a way. But here's what happened. A few years ago, I went over to ASU for a presentation, and it was a very prestigious group of psychologists who were doing this presentation. I wanted to meet these people. So I went over and I was surprised because they were talking about the canine mind and the research they were doing with dogs. Well, I was fascinated. Of course, I do love dogs, but I was fascinated anyway to see that, this is an emerging field in psychology, something different. And it caught my attention. I started doing some reading and some research. And so today I'm going to be sharing with you some of the super interesting things that I have learned about this new field. To start off, think about this. When your dog gazes up at you adoringly, what is your dog most likely to be thinking? Is it A, I love you and I'm so happy to be with you? Or is it B, I can't wait for you to use that can opener? Hmm. Okay, we're going to check your answer again when we finish up today, but pick an A or a B right now and let's see if your answer changes after we go along today. So our goals for today are first, as I mentioned, to examine this emerging trend in psychology research labs in America, in Europe, and in Japan, canine cognition. But secondly, and I think this is super important as well, is how does this research help us to improve humans' lives? So to start, I'm going to take you back for just a little bit of a history lesson in psychology because it'll help us to see where did we get to the point we are today. Now, those of you who have taken 101, I know you recognize this guy, good old B.F. Skinner. There he is with his little rat lab. And from the 1950s to the 1980s, behaviorists like B.F. Skinner dominated psychological research. And they famously refer to the brain as a black box. All of their studies focused exclusively on using external rewards or punishments rather than trying to examine the internal processes of thinking and feeling. Around the mid 1970s, researchers started to recognize the need to break open the black box of the human mind. And in the 90s, as many of you know, our computer technology exploded. For the first time, research methods in psychology changed, and they changed radically. Rat labs, bye bye, and hello, fMRI technology, brain studies. So the behaviorist labs, yeah, there's still a few tucked away in some basements. I think we still have one tucked away in the ASU basement, but pretty much that kind of research is gone. And now instead, the paradigm is cognitive psychologists focusing on studying humans as thinking and feeling beings. Look at these cute little guys. During the past few years, canine cognition labs started popping up in universities all over the world. They're high-tech labs, and these researchers, their goal was to capture images of actual canine thought processes. Let's look inside of one of these labs right now. Emory University, neuroscientist Greg Burns. This is him right here. He was the first to study dogs' thinking by looking at their brains using fMRI technology. Now, Dr. Burns got this idea because he read that the US Navy had several dogs serving on SEAL teams. These dogs, as you can see, this little guy right here, he learned to jump from an airplane, to jump from a helicopter. Well, Dr. Burns felt that, you know what, if dogs could learn to do this, perhaps they could also learn to go into an fMRI scanner and to hold completely still while researchers measured their neural activity. Now, you know, if you have a dog, I know I do, my little Theo, he rarely lays completely still, except when he's sleeping. And even then he doesn't. He's jumping around dreaming. So this was quite a feat. But Dr. Burns set out to do it, and he wanted to do it ethically. Again, those of you who are studying 101, who have studied 101, you know that in psychology, ethics is our number one concern. And this was the case in his lab as well. Comfort and safety of these research dogs would be a top priority in his lab. Dogs would be fully conscious and unrestrained. He wanted them to enter the scanner willingly. They were even trained to wear earmuffs because you know yourself, if you've ever been in a scanner, they're pretty noisy inside. And he wanted to protect their ears, which are quite sensitive. So here's little Cali. And she was actually Dr. Burns' personal dog. She was the first research subject. And he trained her to hold her, set her head perfectly still while she rested on this chin rest during the process because he wanted to get very, very clear images. So we're going to look now, watch just a little bit of video from inside the Emory lab. And I want you to notice that Callie's wearing her ear protection and she's entering the scanner on her own. Now, this is a true story. When I talked to Dr. Burns, he told me that Callie is so eager to go and to do this research that sometimes she tries to push past the other dogs in the lab when it's not her turn. She tries to get in the scanner and be number one. That's how much she wants to do this. Gotta love that, Callie. All right, let's look at some video.
So the inspiration for the project was realized if dogs can be trained to jump out of airplanes and helicopters, we could certainly train them to go into an MRI so we could see what they're thinking. So the task itself is quite complicated because Callie has to walk up some steps to go onto the patient table in the MRI, go in the MRI, shimmy down and stick her head in what we call a head coil, and then hold still.
There are several brains there. Now that is... You're so good. We're so proud of you.
So when we saw those first images, it was unlike anything else. Nobody, as far as I know, had ever captured images of a dog's brain that wasn't sedated. I mean, this was a fully awake, unrestrained dog, and here we have a picture for the first time ever of her brain, and it was incredible. If we can actually capture brain images and see what parts of the brain are activating when we give hand signals or when we talk to it or when we point this way or that way, now we can really begin to understand what a dog is thinking. We hope this opens a whole new door into canine cognition, social cognition of other species, paving the way for understanding interspecies communication. And we think the dogs are the best for this.
All right, so if you want to, by the way, look at more of that video, look at more of the work at Emory, you can just go to that website at Emory University and put in Greg Burns, and you'll get all of the stuff from his lab, all the research they've been doing. And yeah, it's fascinating stuff. Now, here's what happened, and this is how I got to meet Dr. Burns. As I told you, there was an evening over at ASU, and it was called, fun, very cute title, Going to the Dogs. an evening of canine science. So this was a talk that where we had Dr. Burns, as you can see, with a keynote speaker, but we also, it was sponsored by Dr. Nguyen. Now, Dr. Nguyen, he is the canine psychologist at ASU. So you'll see him later on. But anyway, these guys got together, and there was another person there who was also that night who was interested in this subject. So these guys got together and they created what they called Canine Science Co-Laboratory. Now, their very first research study was this: what do dogs think is best, food or praise? Now, you may have your own opinion about this. Think about it. Think about your dog. Think about dogs in general. What do they think is best, food or praise? Well, how they answered the question was they captured fMRI images showing the reward center in the dog's brain lighting up. And they noticed that the brain lit up after the dog got praise and after it got food. So now the question was, what do dogs think is best, praise or food? They were surprised to find that most of the dogs in the study preferred praise from their owners over food. Only 2 of the dogs were real chow hounds, and they showed a preference for the food. Now, this initial discovery was really exciting for the collaboratory, and it has become the basis for much future research in a new field, which they have called canine social cognition. Now, since then, we've had many studies done by the collaboratory, I should say, and other university labs that are showing us that the social cognitive ability in dogs is very highly developed. Here's how Professor Nguyen defines social cognitive ability. He says, dogs show an exaggerated capacity and a deep desire to form warm, caring, long-lasting social bonds. And, of course, this is a great explanation for why they continue to thrive in human society. I want you to listen to this true story. I think it's an excellent example of the discoveries that have been made by the ASU researchers and in other labs. This is a statue in Japan of a very famous dog called Hachiko. Now, Hachiko was adopted by a professor. Here's the professor, by the way. He was a professor at the University of Tokyo. The two fell into a daily routine where the professor and Hachi, as he called him, would walk together every morning to the train station. Hachi would come back every afternoon on his own to meet the train and to greet his owner. This routine continued for 3 years until one day the professor didn't come home from work. He had actually suffered a fatal injury and he died. Now, of course, Hachi had no idea that this had happened. And so every day, like clockwork, when the afternoon train appeared, Hachi could be seen at the station waiting for the professor. Hachi continued to wait for 9 years. One morning, oh, by the way, I should tell you, people at the train station who work there, you might be thinking, wait, how did he eat? They fed Hachi, they took care of Hachi, but Hachi was single-minded. He was waiting for the professor. Now, one morning, as you might suspect, Hachi was found deceased. He died of natural causes, and they found him in the train station baggage room. This was a place he liked to hang out while he was waiting for the professor. So, to honor his loyalty, his love, the the train line actually erected this memorial statue of Hachi and the professor. It's right there at the entrance of the train station. So, great story. It exemplifies what the researchers are telling us. Dogs excel in social cognition, exaggerated capacity to form warm, caring, long-lasting bonds. Now, if you want to have some fun sometime, download this movie. It's an older movie. It's a Hollywood version of the Hachi story that I just told you. And you can see there aren't Japanese actors. There's good old Richard Gere and stuff like that. But it's very true. I saw it. It's very good. For a Hollywood movie, very, very authentic. So I recommend that one. All right. Now, what else are we finding? This is an image of the very famous Max Planck Institute in Germany. Much, much high-level psychological research goes on here. And they also have a canine cognition lab. And what they have told us is this, which was pretty earth-shaking. They say that dogs have cognitive strengths that are superior to other species, including humans. Oh, wait, everybody thinks that humans are the best and the brightest. Well, not according to the Max Planck Institute. I'm going to show you a little video that examines just one superior cognitive strength in dogs.
Hi, Bob. Morning, Kelly. The tulips look great. Have you ever wondered how your dog experiences the world? Here's what she sees. Not terribly interesting. But what she smells, that's a totally different story. And it begins at her wonderfully developed nose. As your dog catches the first hints of fresh air, her nose's moist, spongy outside helps capture any scents the breeze carries. The ability to smell separately with each nostril. Smelling in stereo helps to determine the direction of the smell's source, so that within the first few moments of sniffing, the dog starts to become aware of not just what kinds of things are out there, but also where they're located. As air enters the nose, a small fold of tissue divides it into two separate folds, one for breathing and one just for smelling. This second airflow enters a region filled with highly specialized olfactory receptor cells, several hundred millions of them, compared to our 5 million. And unlike our clumsy way of breathing in and out through the same passage, dogs exhale through slits at the side of their nose, creating swirls of air that help draw in new odor molecules and allow odor concentration to build up over multiple sniffs. But all that impressive nasal architecture wouldn't be much help without something to process the loads of information the nose scoops up. And it turns out that the olfactory system, dedicated to processing smells, takes up many times more relative brain area in dogs than in humans. All of this allows dogs to distinguish and remember a staggering variety of specific scents at concentrations up to 100 million times less than what our noses can detect. If you can smell a spritz of perfume in a small room, a dog would have no trouble smelling it in an enclosed stadium and distinguishing its ingredients to boot. And everything in the street, every passing person or car, any contents of the neighbor's trash, each type of tree, and all the birds and insects in it, has a distinct odor profile telling your dog what it is, where it is, and which direction it's moving in. Besides being much more powerful than ours, a dog's sense of smell can pick up things that can't even be seen at all. A whole separate olfactory system, called the vomeral nasal organ, above the roof of the mouth, detects the hormones all animals, including humans, naturally release. It lets dogs identify potential mates or distinguish between friendly and hostile animals. It alerts them to our various emotional states, and it can even tell them when someone is pregnant or sick. Because olfaction is more primal than other senses, bypassing the thalamus to connect directly to the brain structures involving emotion and instinct, we might even say a dog's perception is more immediate and visceral than ours. But the most amazing thing about your dog's nose is that it can traverse time. The past appears in tracks left by passers-by, and by the warmth of a recently parked car, or the residue of where you've been and what you've done recently. Landmarks like fire hydrants and trees are aromatic bulletin boards carrying messages of who's been by, what they've been eating, and how they're feeling. And the future is in the breeze, alerting them to something or someone approaching long before you see them. Where we see and hear something at a single moment, a dog smells an entire story from start to finish. In some of the best examples of canine-human collaboration, dogs help us by sharing and reacting to those stories. They can respond with kindness to people in distress or with aggression to threats, because stress and anger manifest as a cloud of hormones recognizable to the dog's nose. With the proper training, they can even alert us to invisible threats ranging from bombs to cancer. As it turns out, humanity's best friend is not one who experiences the same things we do, but one whose incredible nose reveals a whole other world beyond our eyes.
Okay, so I think hopefully you're all convinced now that dogs can think with their noses. I think a question now we should ask is, how does this research help us to understand how dogs can help us to improve human life? Well, if you notice in the video, they talked about that uncanny ability to sense hormones. And in this case, I'm going to tell you a true story of one of my students and how his dog helped to improve his life. All right, so this is a student that I had several years ago. He was a returning veteran. He suffered from pretty severe post-traumatic stress. The VA assisted him. I'm going to call him Joe for the purposes of this story. They assisted Joe in acquiring a service dog. And after a few months of working with this dog, Joe told me he felt ready to integrate back into civilian life. And lucky for me, he ended up in my Psych 101 class. First day of class, Joe came up, he introduced himself, and then he introduced me to his dog, Pepper. And he said, "Oh, Dr. Huff, don't worry. Pepper will lie down under my desk. She'll be quiet during the entire class." So that sounded cool. And it was true for the first 2 weeks. But then an amazing thing happened. We were in the middle of a class discussion during week 3 of the class, and for the first time, Joe raised his hand. He decided he was going to, participate in the class to say something. And it was his first time, and you know how it is. It's a little stressful first time you talk in class. Well, as soon as Joe raised his hand, I saw Pepper appear from out under his desk. She placed both of her paws on Joe's shoulders, and she started looking, gazing calmly into Joe's eyes. I heard Joe saying, "It's okay, Pepper, it's okay." And within a few seconds, Pepper went back under the desk. So, moral of the story, Pepper was thinking with her nose. She picked up that Joe was feeling anxious. Her superior cognitive ability, the nose, processed the change in Joe's stress hormones. Now, it wasn't a big change, but it was enough that she detected it, and she responded quickly. She wanted to let Joe know that she was there for him, if he needed comfort or help in any kind of a way. This is a true story. Now, you might be saying, well, that's an anecdotal evidence. That's just one story. Well, look at this. Frontiers of Psychology, just published last month. The most important task for a post-traumatic stress service dog for veterans is disrupting anxiety. Well, it was interesting because sometimes, we see anecdotal evidence, we see things that look like, oh, this is real. But we always have to stop ourselves and we have to say, hey, is there science backing this up? In this case, I was really happy to see this, that obviously these service dogs, which I love this little picture, by the way, it's so adorable. These service dogs are doing a wonderful job in helping our veterans. All right, let's look at another fascinating discovery from yet another canine cognition lab. Now, those of you again who have studied any kind of anatomy or Psych 101, you know, or human development, one of my favorite subjects, it's well known that the brain chemical oxytocin cements emotional bonds between people. So the researchers in canine labs were asking, hey, can this brain chemical also be present in interspecies relationships? Say the relationships between humans and dogs? Answer is, and this was based on recent research at a leading Japanese university, levels of oxytocin spike when humans and their dogs gaze into each other's eyes. This is the same effect that human development psychologists have observed for years when mothers and babies gaze into each other's eyes. Their oxytocin levels spike and it helps to bond them. So this was a fascinating discovery that same thing is happening with dogs and humans. So now this sheds some light on helping us to understand what's responsible for the calming effect of therapy dogs. I love this picture. Therapy dog in bed with a little girl who's obviously in the hospital. Um, and she's gazing at him. Well, I can't tell if he's gazing at her, but obviously he's having a wonderful calming effect. We can explain that now with science. It's not just this dog is cute and cuddly. It's the brain chemical oxytocin that is responsible for that calming effect. Well, we have so many studies I could discuss with you. We don't have that much more time because I want to have time for some questions. But let me just say one more. How do dogs interpret human speech? This has been the subject of study in a research lab in Hungary. And here again, using fMRI technology, they were surprised to learn that dogs, just like people, have a clear left hemisphere dominance for processing meaningful words. Again, those of you who are in one-on-one studying the brain, you know that left hemisphere, right hemisphere. Maybe some of you are anatomy students as well, and you know that that is very important in the study of brain science. But this is the interesting part. When a praise word was spoken to the dogs in a praising tone of voice, the right hemisphere was activated. And in fact, they showed in the images that the brain was lit up like a Christmas tree. So dogs are processing language in both hemispheres. There's some newer research now that is showing that very young children do this as well. But in this case, um, that praising tone of voice. Now, those of you who are studying human development, you know that when parents use a certain tone of voice with particularly with their young children, it makes a huge difference in the child's psychology. I guess we're observing the same thing here in dogs. All right, so let's go back to our original question. When your dog gazes up at you adoringly, what is your dog most likely to be thinking? I love you and I'm so happy to be with you. I can't wait for you to use that can opener. Well, hopefully everybody chose A after our little talk today. And I'm just going to wind up by mentioning this. Studies of animals experiencing love was actually taboo for many years because scientists, we like to have precise testing methods. We don't like to jump to conclusions without evidence. And love, ooh, how do you test love? Well, Dr. Nguyen over at the ASU Department of Psychology says, yeah, it's no longer true. We can observe brain states that register dogs' love. We can measure in dogs the same hormones that are found in humans when they feel love for one another. We now have the science. And in fact, Dr. Nguyen, that's a picture of him, by the way, we have powerful evidence that he calling it the L word, the love, is critical to understanding what our dogs are thinking. So there's Dr. Nguyen. Maybe someday, if you are a student in psychology or any kind of a student over at ASU, you'll see him. You'll see his Canine Cognition lab. Obviously, right now during the pandemic, they're not, doing a lot of public contact. In fact, they're doing no public contact. But I know last spring they were calling for research dogs. So who knows? You might want to volunteer. Once we all get back up to running and campuses are wide open, you might want to bring your dog over to see Dr. Nguyen and get involved in this canine research. All right, so I'm just going to leave you with this. There's a lot of books. If this is something that's appealing to you, like it was to me, Dr. Nguyen has a new book out. His is called Dog is Love, not surprisingly. Greg Burns, he has a wonderful book. Of course, he's a neuroscientist as well. He's got a wonderful book on what he called What It's Like to Be a Dog. And Alexandra Horowitz, she was from the Barnard College, and her book is also fascinating. So there's a couple of books for you there if you wanted to follow up. But right now, I'm going to go over to find out if we have any cool questions.
So we had a couple students comment asking about being curious about dogs and use of sign language. And then we did have one question, do dogs understand body language? And then you can keep your questions coming in the chat.
Yes. Okay. Well, as far as I know, with the research right now, body language, I mean, it's not going to be kind of the body language in the sense of understanding, oh, my owner is feeling sad. That they would pick up from the nose, from the hormones. However, there is a lot of research in dogs being able to read hand signals. And this is actually a very something that you might think, well, oh, that's easy. It is not easy because if you could look at some of the research, I mean, I think Greg Burns has actual footage on his website showing you how they set these dogs up. They kind of hide food in different places, and then the only way they can get it is if they're able to follow the hand signal. And some dogs just can't get it. Others are expert. Most of them are expert. So yes, in that sense, they do read body images. They are reading our body signs. But in terms of to see if we're sad or scared or anxious, they are relying on the nose, because we give off different odors when we feel different ways, and so that's how they can tap into that. What was the other question? I picked up on the second one.
You brought up with the use of hand signals. So one of the questions was connected to sign language.
Okay.
So we have another question. Is tail wagging a sign of happiness?
Whoa, that's going to be an interesting question. Now let me go through and see if I have some science for you on that. Um, you know, of course I have my own opinions, but I don't know that I have any science on tail wagging. I know what my veterinarian told me, but I don't know if she was just observing anecdotally. She called it the happy tail. She said, "Oh, some dogs just have a happy tail." And I like that. It sounds good. But I don't know of any research published kind of studies or stuff like that on tail wagging. Um, but I think there is a lot coming out now about dogs dreaming. Now, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but you notice how when your dog is asleep, sometimes you'll see them running and moving. And yeah, so obviously they have a rich dream life, the same way we do. And of course, if you've studied 101, you know that there's a lot of science around dreaming. And obviously, dreams are important for them, particularly in this respect. They have actually shown this experimentally. And that is if you teach your dog a trick, say it's Monday afternoon, you teach your dog a new trick, and your dog is kind of sort of getting it, but not really. He's doing it kind of, but not really. The next day, after your dog has a good night's sleep, ask him to do the trick again. And chances are he'll be better at it. Now, why? Why is that? Because just like us, during sleep, our memory systems consolidate. We begin to process the information that we learn during the day, and we actually get better at it. So that's one of the benefits of sleep, by the way, is that we do consolidate memories. And so before you take your exams, make sure you get a good night's sleep because your memories will be much sharper if you do. So yeah, dogs are the same thing. I kind of did that on my own dog. I experimented with it and it worked like a charm. So that's something you can try on your dog. Teach it a trick, nothing too exotic, but then see if the next day it's better after it's got a good night's sleep.
So
Yep.
we have a couple more questions coming in, so you can keep them coming. When dogs see other dogs, does their oxytocin increase? Was the next question.
Hmm. I don't know that I have any research on that one. But I mean, obviously, we have all observed, dogs, um, the joy that comes from that. And back in the 80s, there was a lot of research coming out about dogs being pack animals. And these researchers were claiming that, dogs are happiest when they're with other dogs. Now, Dr. Nguyen at ASU says that is not true. His views are very, very strong that dogs are really and truly, they might enjoy hanging out with the dogs up at the dog park, but they're only really truly happy. They're only really truly content. They only truly feel safe when they're with their human. And that's why he has actually done his research. He wanted to sort of dismiss some of that research that had been done in the 80s, saying that dogs would rather be with other dogs. And some of us, I actually believed that, for a long time, that, oh, it's cruel if you don't let your dog be with other dogs. Well, I mean, yeah, they have fun, but what they really want to do is be with you. And that's what all the current research is saying. And certainly that's what Dr. Nguyen is arguing. Other question?
Yeah, so we've got a couple that connect with like dogs' reactions, like what are other signs of happiness, wiggling their nose or licking?
Mm-hmm.
And then we have one, are we able to fake our emotions with our dogs?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, I guess, I mean, when you think about it, there's some research coming out now that is, in fact, my students in my Psych 101 class, I just gave them an article about how if you put on a fake smile, there's some new research now that's showing that if you put on a fake smile, that you actually release the same hormones because of the change in your facial muscles. You release the same hormones that you would do if you were genuinely feeling happy. And so at least for a brief period of time, your spirits would be lifted and your mood would improve. So I would think that under those conditions, I'm kind of jumping here because I don't know this this to be a fact for sure. But I was thinking that it's all, when we know it's about the hormones that they're picking up on, that yeah, I mean, I guess they could. I want to tell you one story though that's kind of related to this. It's about you know how your dogs get that guilty look, and again in human development we talk about little kids again getting the guilty look, and so when you do something bad, right, you get that guilty look. So they did some studies on dogs and they said when they have that guilty look, are they really thinking like, oh gosh, I shouldn't have stolen that piece of cake off the counter. That was a bad thing. Nope, nope. Their reaction, that guilty look, is really about the fact that they know that you're going to yell at them. And they're dreading it. They're like, no, no, oh my gosh, look what I did. I can see her face changing. She's going to let me have it. She's going to yell at me. And so, really, that guilty look, what we ascribe as a guilty look, is really nothing more than them worrying about the fact that we're going to let them have it, not physically, but maybe tell them they're a bad dog and they don't want to hear that. And I have to say that the same thing in human development with children, a lot of times parents think that when they, punish their children are learning, well, no, I better not open the cabinet. Really, what they're learning is it's not about they're learning a lesson about the cabinet, they're learning a lesson about what mom wants me to do or doesn't want me to do. And so that it's the same phenomena. So that's sort of interesting as well. But Alyssa, anything else?
Yes, we have. So a question that came up, or two that are kind of connected. What are the best breeds for making a strong human connection, or what are the breeds that are found the most intelligent?
Okay, good questions. So I'm going to tell you what Dr. Nguyen would say over at ASU because he addresses, in fact, he has a whole chapter about this in his book, Dog's Love. Again, back in the 80s, we were doing a lot of testing of dogs, like saying, well, oh yeah, well, you might have noticed that Cali was a breed that we typically think of as, very smart. Um, so yeah, some breeds are easier to train initially, but Dr. Nguyen argues that in terms of intelligence, they're equal. They're equal. And so you might say, well, wait a minute, how could they be equal? Well, it could take longer with certain breeds to get them to learn the things you want them to learn, whatever it is. But he says they all have the same basic intelligence and they're all driven by one thing, and that is love. So he says the more we're willing to, show them love and hang out with them, that's their biggest thing. He has a whole chapter in the book which kind of breaks your heart because he says, um, you know, when we leave them and, sometimes we come home and they've like messed up the house and we're saying, oh, they're bad dogs. He says they're just trying to work out their frustration because their love object is gone. They love us so much. They want to be with us so much that yeah, somebody's writing up here, they follow us everywhere, they go to the bathroom with you, oh my gosh, you can't get away from them. Why are they doing that? They love us. And that's what Dr. Nguyen is telling us. And so yeah, yourself, some people, too, children, even adults, some are easier to quicker to learn, but with that love, he maintains that every dog is capable of learning. Was that the question? Was there another aspect to that as well? Was there a part?
I felt that connected well, and that connected well. Somebody had asked for tips when you've got a new dog, or best ways to bond with a dog, and you just kind of went over that.
Yes, bonding is, yes, hanging with them. And that's why they say when you get, in fact, he says when you get your new dog, you really have to take it with you everywhere. And, again, we're like, that's really, really hard sometimes. Luckily, during the pandemic, it's easier. They're saying that dogs are so happy now that you guys are home with your dog a lot more than you've ever been. And of course, once we go back to work, ooh, I don't know, you might have to have some dog psychology going on here because they're going to be so bummed. Wait, what happened? Anyway, go ahead. Go ahead.
I will say that Student Life just posted the attendance URL link in the chat. If you have any problems with that, you can go ahead and send a chat message to me. We've got a couple more questions. Some people were asking about barking, like why do dogs bark at the door, or different signs for barking?
Right. So, I mean, I'm going to go back to the story of my student. I told you about my veteran student. Um, and you also saw this in the video. When dogs are sensing that, more so in the video than with my student, because with my student, the dog was sensing that my student was anxious and he was trying to comfort him. But if you notice in the video, they said that dogs will um, snarl and show aggression towards a person who they think is trying to attack um, their human. And that's going to, again, that could be a breed thing as well. Some breeds are going to be more aggressive than others, but all of them, even my little Theo, who's like a little tiny little guy. One day we were at the park in the outside of Albertsons, and this man came up to the car. He was obviously, had been drinking or something. He was in bad shape, and he was staggering and he was banging into our car, like falling over. And my little Theo went nuts. He was barking and growling and snarling. Of course, the windows were up, so there wasn't a lot he could really do. But there you go. I mean, yeah, dogs will let us know if there is a potential intruder, if there's some kind of danger. And again, um, they're trying to, that's their job. They're sensing it. Their senses are picking it up and their brain is reacting and they're acting. Now, there's another kind of bark which you may have noticed. And this is Dr. Nguyen talks about this, the greeting bark. So, when you come home, if you've been out, even if you go out sometimes for 15 minutes, I know my Theo will do this. You go out for 15 minutes, you come back and he barks like, oh my gosh, I miss you. It's the end of the world. And in that sense, what they're doing is barking to greet us, to, to again, try to express their love, their loyalty, their admiration. And so that's not an aggressive thing. It's really what they call the greeting bark. And yeah, so different barks. Yeah, different barks. But they always have our back, which is a good thing. I love that little picture. Anything else?
We have another interesting question. Why are dogs able to sleep so easily? And they were questioning if they've got different levels of melatonin.
Ooh, that's interesting. And I don't know the answer to the melatonin. Um, but I know that Dr. Nguyen in his book, he talks about the idea that, again, sleep is, well, you think about us. I mean, again, we're in my class, we're talking about sleep right now, and we're talking about the causes of insomnia and those kinds of sleeping disorders. And, dogs typically are not subject to that kind of stuff at all. They don't get insomnia. And again, you think about the things that cause anxiety in humans, very, very different from dogs. They're able to resolve their anxiety very quickly by barking, growling, whatever it is they have to do. Where with us, we don't resolve it, and so we can end up with some of those conditions that you've read about in Psych 101. So yeah, so they're not going to have trouble sleeping, and but I don't know if it's related to what their chemical that chemical piece. I don't know about the melatonin, so I'm not going to comment on that. I don't want to speculate.
You are doing a great job, Dr. Huff. So I have one more, well, I've got at least one more question that I think everyone would be interested in, maybe a couple more that are coming in. But one is, how can I get my dog to improve its relationship with others? So if it's my dog and it doesn't get along, let's say with my children or other people in the household, if there's tips for ways of building those bonds.
You know, again, in terms of the thinking part, which is what we're talking about now, um, that question is outside of our realm. I'm going to tell you though, there are some amazing books out there that are telling us how we can, socialize our dogs. Now, remember, I said that they are superior in social cognition, but social cognition does not mean that, they're sociable. It just means that they're able to, well, let's go back to the definition of social cognition, because I think that's really oops, I lost it. Um, that's the heart and soul of, what we've been talking about today. And that is the quote. I'm trying to get that quote from Dr. Nguyen. I know it's here. Come on, yo. No, we're not going to watch that again. Yeah, okay. Well, here. That exaggerated capacity to form warm, caring, long-lasting social bonds. Now, what they're talking about here is bonds with their person, with the family that they're part of. Doesn't mean they're going to have warm, caring, long-lasting bonds with everybody they meet. Um, they might or they may not. And that's the same way with people. When we study personality theory, don't we learn the same thing? That some people are very sociable, some people are, high in their of wanting to go out and party, and then others are like, no, I'm more of an internal person. I just want to hang out with a few close friends. And so, I think we probably would have to say the dogs are the same way. Doesn't mean that they can't, you know, um, learn to, be a little bit more, um, social. But if that's not their basic personality, then probably it's going to be a struggle. So yeah, but there are books out there about how to socialize your dog and all that kinds of stuff. The one thing I would caution you about is to make sure that in light of what we learned today, make sure that the training methods that those books are advising us to use are all based on love, based on rewards, not punishment. Again, going back to the behaviorists, good old B.F. Skinner and those guys back in the 50s, um, you know, they're they were willing to shock animals. They were willing to use negative methods to teach animals, to teach children. Um, those days are gone. Okay. And so some dog trainers are still sort of trapped in that time warp. So you need to be very careful when you pick up a book on dog training, that you keep in mind the fact that these dogs, they're living for that long lasting social bond. So they're going to do things for you out of love and out of praise. They're not going to do things because you shock them with a shock collar or something like that. So just make sure that you look carefully at the books, because there's some good ones out there and there's some that are not so good.
All right, well, that was great advice. And Dr. Huff, thank you so much. Anybody who has video, give her a thumbs up. This was a great first event for us. So I'm going to go ahead and officially kind of wrap up, but I'm going to stay on. And I've got some people who might have issues with the link. Go ahead and add that to the chat and we can try to identify if there's any problems. Our next session for Your Brain on College is October 13th, same link, 4 o'clock in October. Thank you all for attending. Again, thank you so much to Dr. Huff. This was a great first run with our virtual series. So everyone, thank you.